Bonjour et bienvenue à tous sur Franc-Tireur. Les rencontres Franc-Tireur. Aujourd'hui, on a la chance de recevoir Steven Pinker. Il écrit ce livre aux arènes, La rationalité. Nous allons parler ensemble de rationalité. Rendez-vous tout de suite. Bonjour Steven Pinker.
Bonjour.
Comment vous allez?
Bien. Oui.
Très bien. Vous êtes en France aujourd'hui pour parler du livre Rationalité qui vient de paraître aux éditions Les Arènes. Et d'ailleurs, nous sommes aujourd'hui dans les locaux des arènes pour faire cette interview. Et la première question que j'ai envie de vous poser par rapport à la rationalité, c'est un exemple que vous prenez pour commencer le livre sur le loto, par exemple. Alors, si on imagine que quelqu'un qui décide de jouer au loto, avec toutes les chances de perdre, ne va-t-il pas accepter d'épargner pour sa retraite avec toutes les chances de gagner? Est-ce que c'est ça, la rationalité? Ou le manque de rationalité?
If they're doing it in order to earn money, then it is not rational. Because if the casino, if the government makes a profit, then on average, the players have to lose. It can only be worth it if you know that you're paying for the thrill of Las Vegas with the showgirls, with the spinning lemons and cherries and bells, or just the thought it's possible that I might become a millionaire. If that's worth some money to you to think it's possible, then it could be rational, but if it's as a way of making money, it's not rational.
Oui. Est-ce que la rationalité, est-ce que ça s'apprend? Est-ce que c'est quelque chose qui s'apprend?
Some of rationality is just part of being human. I think it is innate. And in fact, I begin the book by talking about the San hunter-gatherers of the Kalahari Desert, one of the last hunter-gatherer tribes, and a kind of picture of what life was like before we had formal education, before we had literacy. And I argue they're very, very rational. They have to infer from a few tracks on the ground what kind of animal, what species, what sex, what condition, where it's likely to go. And they do it with argument, they do it with logic, they do it with a kind of science. So I think that is just part of being human. Mm-hmm. But now we have tools of enhanced rationality. We have logic, we have probability theory, we have game theory, we have rational choice theory. Those you do have to learn. I hope to teach them in the book. I think they are intuitive, but they are more powerful than our innate, inborn, natural sense of rationality. Our natural sense of rationality, I call it ecological rationality, because it's what we use in a natural environment. But it's mixed together with particular knowledge of a particular area, like how do we navigate social obligations, or how do we think of contamination and disease, or how do we think about how do we mentally count objects. But logic and probability are general purpose tools. We could apply them to anything. That we have to learn.
C'est très rassurant ce que vous nous dites, parce que nous, Français, on a tendance à être complexés par rapport aux Allemands, par exemple. Si on prend une nation qui n'est pas très loin de la nôtre, on a l'impression qu'ils sont rigoureux, rationnels, que nous sommes latins et que nous sommes des romantiques, un peu, voilà. Bon. Et alors, ce que vous nous dites, c'est qu'une fois qu'on a les outils, on peut devenir presque allemand, finalement. Ou est-ce que, voilà, est-ce que la rationalité se définit par une éducation ou une nation?
Well, I try to distinguish rationality, which is how do you pursue the goals that you want, from what those goals should be. There's nothing irrational about dancing, about appreciating beauty, appreciating good food, falling in love, loving your children, enjoying friends, laughing. There's a stereotype that if you're rational, you have to ignore all of those things. You have to be serious and dour. But that is a misconception. Rationality is a means to an end, and the ends should be human ends. There's nothing irrational about enjoying yourself, dancing, falling in love. That's not irrational.
Dans le livre, page 131, dans ce livre ici, que je montre encore une fois, Il faut montrer des choses qui ont du sens. Voilà, donc c'est pour ça que je le montre plusieurs fois. Vous parlez des données publiques qui ont un essor important dans les sociétés démocratiques. Alors, quand il y a énormément de données, est-ce que ça ne tue pas l'information? Et surtout, comment faisons-nous pour ne pas être submergés par ces données et se réfugier dans les impressions ou l'imagination?
Yes, we are. I mean, we're overwhelmed with facts, and it gives the possibility that different people can look at different facts to support their own arguments. So if you work for a tobacco company, you can find facts that say smoking doesn't cause cancer. It's called motivated reasoning, where instead of following all the facts to lead to whatever conclusion they lead to, you know what the conclusion is and you select the facts that will result in that conclusion. It's called motivated reasoning. And it's not just for your own self-interest. So, you know, if you're a tobacco company, you want to sell cigarettes. But we also do it for our coalition, our clique, our political party, our religious faith. In English, it's called the my side bias. You argue for the beliefs that make your own tribe, your own team, your own clique, your own coalition look wise and noble, that makes the rival side look foolish and stupid. And a lot of political debates are people try to find reasons, like very good lawyers, for whatever position their side takes to begin with. It is a form of public irrationality, and it can be shown in the lab. So if you give people a policy, a potential piece of legislation, and you say, this is the solution from the left-wing party for, let's say, better health care, then people who are on the left say, yes, great idea, it makes sense, it's save money, it's fair. People on the right say, no, it'll never work, it's unfair, it's flawed. You present the very same policy, you just switch the labels. You say, this is the position of the right-wing party. Well, then the people on the left say, it's terrible, it'll never work. The people on the right say, oh, it's perfect. So it's the same content, the same actual substance, but if it's labeled left-wing or right-wing, people will accept or reject it. Now, that's not rational, but it is a very pervasive bias. What we ideally should do is to have neutral, impartial organizations that try always to use evidence to find the best solutions to problems. Now, in theory, that's what science should do, because if there is a hypothesis, it has to be tested with an experiment or with data. That's what journalism should do. If there is a claim, then the editor will make sure it's fact-checked. That's what the courts should do. If there's someone accused of a crime, you look for evidence. So you don't just leave it to one side or another, because everyone is biased toward their own side. You need, like, referees. You need a social institution that is dedicated to objective fact-finding. And I think that that is the solution to a puzzle that that motivated me to write the book. Namely, how can our species be so rational? We sent people to the moon, we invented smartphones, we discovered DNA, we discovered the Big Bang. On the other hand, members of our species also believe that Hillary Clinton ran a child sex ring out of a pizzeria, that there is healing power in pyramids and in crystals, that COVID vaccines are a plot by Bill Gates to inject microchips into people's arms. All kinds of crazy stuff. How can one species be so rational and so irrational? And part of the answer is that we can't depend on the rationality of one person, because none of us is omniscient, none of us is infallible, none of us gets the truth from God. We work in organizations, in institutions that follow rules that allow the whole community to be more rational than any individual in the community.
Donc, en effet, il vaut mieux penser en universel avec plusieurs personnes, confronter son point de vue plutôt que de penser avec sa propre chapelle. Donc, justement, par rapport à ceci, la rationalité, vous le dites, exige que nous fassions la différence entre ce qui est vrai et ce que nous croyons vrai. Yes. Donc, pour faire suite à ce que vous disiez, on a tendance, nous humains, à préférer le déclinisme et à se dire on va plutôt croire que ça va mal plutôt que la vérité qui est peut-être que ça va bien.
Yeah, so in previous books, Le Triomphe des Lumières and Le Pardon en nous, I presented graphs showing that first violence has gone down over time, and other terrible parts of human life have also gone down. Poverty and illiteracy and disease. We live more than twice as long as people did a couple of hundred years ago. So there has been progress, but people can't see progress if they get their view of the world from the news, from journalism. The reason is that the news is what happens, not what doesn't happen. And so if there's a whole part of the world that is at peace, that is not fighting any wars, you just never have a headline that says that. You have never a headline that says East Asia has been at peace for 40 years, because that's something not happening instead of something happening. Also, the news doesn't report things that happen gradually. Like every day, 137,000 people escape from extreme poverty. But you don't have a headline, 137,000 people escape from poverty today. But it happens every single day. After 25 years, it could be 1 billion people escaping from poverty, but no one knows about it. So the cognitive side of the process is that we get our sense of probability, of risk, of danger from examples we recall from memory, sometimes called the availability bias, named by Daniel Kahneman and Amos Tversky, the famous psychologists who pioneered the study of human irrationality. And they noted that if something is in the news, we think it's very common. People think that traveling by plane is dangerous because they can recall a plane crash. They don't think that driving is dangerous, even though driving is many times more dangerous, because no particular car crash makes a big headline in the news, unless it's a celebrity like Princess Di. But the thousands and thousands of car crashes that happen every year, they're not reported in the news, and so people don't take them into account. So there's a combination of the nature of journalism, namely its events, the nature of the human mind. If we can remember an event, we think it's common, and so you get illusions, and people don't really have a good sense of what's happening in the world. In particular, they don't have a sense of the ways in which humanity has been making progress.
Donc vous parliez en effet de ce livre-ci qui est sorti précédemment, et donc Bill Gates a dit que c'était le meilleur livre du monde. C'est une phrase qui vous amuse? On va faire juste une petite aparté là-dessus. La phrase de Bill Gates, c'est quelque chose qui vous plaît ou...
Oh yes,
oui?
Well, it pleased me. It also pleased the publisher of my book, because when he said that in his review, they advanced the publication date up by 2 weeks, so that the books would be in the stores just after he made that very nice quotation.
Donc en effet, voilà, Bill Gates a indiqué que c'était un livre très important, voire le meilleur du monde. Et ce que je voulais savoir aussi par rapport à ça, vous parliez tout à l'heure du progrès, du fait qu'on n'avait pas vraiment envie de croire que les choses allaient mieux. Est-ce que parfois les victimaires, les déclinistes se forgent une identité et se créent un lieu pour exister à travers cette vision un peu négative du monde? C'est une façon d'être?
Yes, it's certainly for many people their particular grievance or complaint against some enemy gives their life meaning. You can see examples on the left where it's capitalism or neoliberalism. You can see it on the right where it's the deep state, as they say in English, or the the left-wing establishment in the universities and newspapers. And in both of those factions, whatever the enemy says, they have to believe the opposite. Mm-hmm. We see that in the United States now, where a lot of the people who are resisting vaccines, they do it because, well, if the liberals say that I should take a vaccine, then I'm not going to do it.
Dans le livre, il y a un chapitre qui s'appelle Le monde qui débloque, et vous dites que souvent, quand les gens vous rencontrent, ils vous posent la question de savoir est-ce que réellement le monde débloque. Alors je voulais savoir ce que vous leur répondiez.
Yes. So it seems like the world is losing its mind because of the conspiracy theories, the medical quackery like homeopathy and crystal healing powers, like fake news, like belief in paranormal phenomena, extrasensory perception and clairvoyance and reincarnation. So I try to figure out what is going on. Now, these kinds of beliefs have always been with us. They're not a new thing. They're not the faults of Twitter and Facebook. There have been conspiracy theories going back for centuries, like the Illuminati, the Protocols of the Elders of Zion, the Jews are poisoning the wells. There have been belief in paranormal phenomena. That's what we call religion, miracles and signs from God. There have been fake news. Before the 20th century, probably most journalism was fake news. Newspapers would have reports of they pulled a sea monster out of the Atlantic Ocean, there's a civilization on Mars, there's a baby born with 2 heads. That was what journalism was until journalism decided to clean up its act. We're seeing them now, I think in part because it's easier to circulate them in social media, but they also are circulated in cheap newspapers, in gossip and storytelling. I think the way the human mind works is that when it comes to beliefs about the here and now, the world we live in, what food is in the refrigerator, whether there's gasoline in the car, whether the children have had breakfast and they're dressed and ready to go to school, I think we're all pretty rational. We have to be. The world forces us to be rational. But when it comes to questions like what happens in the White House or the headquarters of ExxonMobil, or what happened a billion years ago, or what happens in the microscopic scale where diseases occur, people aren't committed to beliefs being true or false, because for most of our history as a species, you couldn't find out. Before there was science, before there was government record keeping, it was all a matter of, I can believe this, you can believe that. And so people hold beliefs in terms of how morally uplifting they are. Do they have the right message? Do they make me feel good about my group, my tribe? Are they entertaining? And people would still hold beliefs that make them feel proud of their group. Whether they're true or false, their attitude is no one knows. So did Hillary Clinton really run a child sex ring out of a pizzeria? The people who believe that, it's not like they have proof. It's not like they believe it strongly enough that they call the police. But it's like, well, that's the kind of thing she could do. She's so evil. Also, so I think that's part of the explanation. The other part, and this is a point also made by the French cognitive psychologist Hugo Mercier, that we all have primitive intuitions. Again, this is not new. These go back, they're as old as the human species. Ways in which we conceptualize reality naturally. So we think of, when we deal with other people, we imagine that they have a mind, not just a body. I think that you have beliefs, you have desires, you have emotions. I try to get in your head. I don't think of you just as a hunk of matter. Well, if you think that way, it's a short step to imagining minds that can exist separately from bodies. And so you have ghosts and spirits and gods and demons. It's a very natural way for the human mind to think. Another example is we think we all are essentialists. We think that a living thing has a kind of stuff, a kind of essence, a kind of matter inside that allows it to live, to function, to prosper, and the disease comes from some contaminant, some pollutant that it goes in the body. And that's why Mercier has shown many, many cultures have independently come up with the idea of treating disease by bloodletting. You cut open a vein, you bleed out, because they think, well, the toxins, the germs, the contaminants will go out. By that same mindset, intuitively, a vaccine is the craziest thing you could do. You're actually taking the virus, the bacterium, the germ, and you're actually injecting it into your body. That is deeply unintuitive. Now, most of us unlearn these primitive intuitions through school, through believing the scientific establishment, that the mind really is just the patterns of activity in the brain, that disease comes from germs and microbes, that the immune system can be sensitized. These are all scientific lessons. But if you don't trust the scientific establishment, if you think that's just one set of priests and I prefer to follow my priests, then people will fall back on their primitive intuitions and they'll reject the findings of science.
Donc pour être dans la suite logique de ce que vous nous dites et pour comprendre bien le propos du biais cognitif, et ça nous rassure parce que ça donne une explication, je fais référence à ce que vous dites dans le livre par rapport au mandat de Donald Trump dans lequel il s'est permis 30 000 mensonges, c'est assez énorme, donc de falsifier la vérité. Et nous avons ici un personnage qui s'appelle Éric Zemmour qui aussi joue avec l'histoire, donc c'est aussi des personnages comme ça qui ont envie de faire leur propre vérité. Est-ce que nous sommes dans l'ère de la post-vérité? Où est la place de la vérité quand on a affaire à des personnages comme ça?
Well, it's interesting that I spoke before about institutions that help us to move toward the truth, because none of us is rational enough to do it by ourselves. So we have journalism, we have universities, we have government agencies, we have science. And these institutions are being threatened. They're being threatened from the left by cancel culture that tries to prevent certain ideas even from being expressed. And it's only by expressing ideas and evaluating them that our species can be rational, because no one is perfect. No one is infallible. We try to discover the truth by expressing an idea, then criticizing it and testing it. So if you turn that down, if some ideas can never be said, we're guaranteed not to be able to find the truth. But then from the right, there is the attempt by Trump and similar demagogues and populists to try to undermine the institutions of truth-seeking from a different direction, to say that the mainstream press, that's all fake news, it's all lies. The government, that's the deep state, they actually have conspiracies. And it's not so much that politicians who do that, like Trump, expect that everyone will believe them. Because, I mean, 30,000 lies, no one believed all 30,000 lies. But just to flood the country with so many lies that no one knows what's true or what's false, that no one can be trusted. Therefore, I will trust what my leader, the charismatic chief, says, because even though there are others that criticize him, they're lying too. And so there's an attempt by many autocrats to try to pollute the marketplace of ideas, to try to just flood so many lies, even if they contradict each other, that people just say, well, who knows what the truth is? No one knows what the truth is, so I'll accept his truth.
En France, récemment, on a eu un film qui est sorti qui s'appelle Illusion perdue, qui est une adaptation d'Honoré de Balzac, qui est assez dur, sévère avec les journalistes. Et alors la question que je vous pose, Balzac, ça date pas d'aujourd'hui. Donc cette haine du journaliste ou des médias existe depuis longtemps. Ou est-ce que c'est récent? On dit toujours que le monde aujourd'hui est en train de mourir. Est-ce que c'est que maintenant ou ça a toujours été le cas?
Yes, it's true, and trust in journalism has gone down. In the United States, I don't know about France, but it is the least trusted institution. And that is a problem because, of course, everyone criticizes journalism, but still, it's better than the alternatives. It's better than rumors. It's better than Twitter. It's better than just what you heard from a friend of a friend of a friend. Because journalism, at least responsible journalism, has editing. It checks sources.
Right.
There are verifying facts before they can be published. If there is an error, there's a correction. Newspapers try to develop a reputation for accuracy. That's better than alternatives. That's not always perfect, but it is still a means that we can try to approach the truth.
Donc, on a vu un petit peu comment fonctionne l'humain à travers ses biais cognitifs. Je voulais reprendre avec vous 3 petites notions importantes qui sont dans le livre, qui sont des vrais outils. Donc, il y a l'anticipation myope, c'est le plaisir tout de suite. Vous en aviez un petit peu parlé tout à l'heure. Le plaisir tout de suite et on est heureux demain. On préfère ce qu'il y a immédiatement plutôt que de voir ce qu'il y a demain. Une deuxième théorie qui est la théorie du fou. Donc, qui reprend naissance avec Donald Trump, qui peut menacer d'appuyer, quand il était président de la République des États-Unis, d'appuyer sur le bouton nucléaire. Et il y a aussi le jeu de l'escalade, qui est très intéressant parce que vous prenez cet exemple, nous combattons pour que nos hommes ne soient pas morts pour rien. Donc c'est comme si l'homme voulait tout le temps réparer quelque chose par l'outil de la guerre, comme si son ADN était attiré par la conquête et la guerre. Donc ces 3 théories sont importantes pour nous faire comprendre comment nous fonctionnons en tant qu'humains.
Well, I'm glad you brought those up because in a lot of the book, I had to answer the question, why do people believe in conspiracy theories and fake news and so on? But part of it is just tools for understanding really the human condition that are not obvious, that need some analysis. So one of them is discounting the future and myopic discounting, which is when should we, why do people often say that rationality is the opposite of emotion? What they usually mean is, since we always apply our rationality to get something that we desire, but we often say that it's emotional if we favor what we desire now at the expense of what we desire in the future. Such as you eat too much now and then you look at the scale and you're upset that you gained weight, or someone says something that is critical and so you lash out in anger and you poison your relationship or develop a reputation as a difficult person. You get your paycheck, you spend it all on some luxury instead of saving some of it. We all do this. So the question is, what is the optimal way in which we should trade off pleasure now against pleasure in the future? The answer isn't it should always be in the future, because it would make no sense to save all your money for a great vacation when you're 85 years old, because you may not live to 85. And who knows what the world will be like when you're 85 years old. So you should consume now. The question is how much. And the problem is the irrationality is not that people consume now, but they probably consume too much now. They don't save enough for retirement. It's hard to look ahead enough. And there's an additional twist, sometimes called myopic or nearsighted discounting, where what's in front of you right now is just so irresistible that people are, their decision is distorted by something they can't get out of their head. Whereas if it's in the future, then it's easy to think about dispassionately. So for example, if you're filling out a menu now for a dinner in 2 months, you say, oh, I'll have the vegetables, I'll have the fruit, but if it's right in front of you, you'll say, oh, I'm going to have the lasagna, and the cheesecake. So that's myopic discounting. And it's better to sort of think of the trade-off between now and the future, because there is a trade-off. We can't help it. We shouldn't defer everything for the future, but think about more how best to do it. So another not obvious feature of rationality is, what do you do in negotiations, in standoffs? And that's the subject matter of game theory, which is what is the rational choice when the outcome depends on someone else's rational choice. And game theory has many, many surprises, things that are not intuitively obvious. And one of them is there can be an advantage to being irrational, to being out of control, to being ignorant. They're sometimes called paradoxical tactics. First discovered by Thomas Schelling, a political scientist, more than 60 years ago. But an example is, there's a game that teenagers sometimes play called chicken. I don't know if there's the equivalent in French. The two teenagers approach each other on a highway, and the first one to swerve out of the way loses. He is the chicken. Chicken means coward or fearful person. Now, how do you win at a game of chicken? Well, if you lock your steering wheel and you put a brick on the gas pedal, and so you can't steer, the other guy has no choice but to steer. So the winner is the one who has no control. Or sometimes ignorance can be rational. Sometimes when there is a truck with money inside a safe, there's a sign on the door that says, "Driver does not know combination to the safe." Now, that's to the advantage of the driver to be ignorant. If he knows the combination, then a robber can put a gun to his head and say, "Open the safe or I'll kill you." If the driver can say, "I don't know the combination of the safe," that's an advantage. So it's an advantage to be ignorant. It is a danger to know something. And the madman theory is an example where it can be, there can be an advantage in being irrational. Namely, if you're so crazy, if you're so stubborn that another person can't threaten you to do the right thing, then they have to back off. It was named after an episode in during the Vietnam War, where Richard Nixon, according to the story, he ordered nuclear-armed bomber aircraft to go dangerously close to the Soviet Union, so that the Soviets could think, "Oh my God, this guy's crazy. We better not try to pressure him to get out of Vietnam, because even if it makes no sense, he'll still do it." And the idea is that gave him a tactical advantage. That's the theory. So the third paradox that you brought up, also from game theory, is called the escalation game. And this is a situation in which there's a contest between two rivals, two enemies, and they keep investing, each trying to outbid or outlast the other, but the loser and the winner both pay. So you can imagine a perverse eBay auction, where in the auction you want something, someone else wants it, you increase your bid, they increase their bid, you increase their bid, they increase their bid. But imagine a crazy eBay where even if you lose, you have to pay, but you don't get the object. Well, then the rational thing is just to keep bidding to infinity. And that sounds like an artificial situation, but we're often in the equivalent in situations like a war of attrition, like World War I, where each side thinks, well, if I just have a few more soldiers, if I last a little bit longer, eventually he'll surrender. Now, if both sides think that, the war can go higher and higher, and you can have like 15 million deaths, like in World War I. The only way to win an escalation game is don't play. That is, don't even get into it. Anyway, you asked about, those are three examples where what's rational is not obvious, and you have to know these tools of analyzing rationality to really appreciate some of what looks like crazy behavior in humans.
Donc l'exemple que vous donnez me rappelle à peu près le choix de l'escalade, ce qu'a fait M. Biden quand il s'est retiré d'Afghanistan. Lui, il a décidé d'arrêter l'escalade. Donc je ne sais pas quel regard vous avez là-dessus, mais ma dernière question, c'était justement sur, avec tout ce qu'on a appris dans ce livre, très intéressant vraiment, pour nous apprendre à penser avec nous-mêmes et pas forcément contre nous-mêmes, est-ce que finalement, est-ce qu'on a besoin de rationalité? Est-ce qu'il ne faut pas tout laisser tomber et se dire bon, bah, on ne sait pas, on ne contrôle rien, alors on est au courant, on le sait, mais est-ce qu'on n'est pas plus heureux justement quand on ignore?
I think it's the rationality has brought good things to the world. It's the only thing that can bring good things to the world because nature doesn't care about us. New diseases appear, there are natural disasters, there's dark side of human nature. But over the course of history, by applying rationality, we have made little bits of progress. And my 2 previous books, documenting the facts of progress, raise the question, what caused it? And I think the answer is rationality. When people apply, if they apply their brains to making people better off. Now, granted, that's not the only way people can apply rationality. It can also be to hold power, to develop better weapons. But if both you have the goal of improving human welfare and we apply our collective brain power, our rationality, then sometimes we discover solutions. And if we keep the solutions, if we don't repeat our mistakes, then the result is what we call progress. I think that's true of humanity as a whole. It's also, I think, true in our lives that if we are more thoughtful, if we try to recognize our own biases, then we live better lives. We're healthier, we live longer, and there are, just to show that that statement itself is rational, there are studies that show that people who are less likely to commit these biases are healthier, live out better lives.
Parfait. Je vous remercie beaucoup, Monsieur Pinker, d'être venu jusqu'à nous en France pour montrer et parler de ce livre assez essentiel quand même, je l'avoue. Donc, ravi de cette conversation et à très très bientôt. Merci.
Merci.